All right,
Let's go.
man, I'm so excited to be back.
Yes.
Again, my name is Adam Cruz,
My name is Antonio Reyes.
and we are the Soul Tapes podcast.
Yes.
So today, I just recently turned 28.
Which is yesterday?
Yes.
Yes.
And I started to realize the fact that one of my takeaways from becoming a new age was that I feel like I have to be more mature.
Yeah, I think, man, that's the pressure of what's next.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what's the pressure of like, man, I turned 28. I just turned 30 this year. So
Yeah.
it's like, man.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm like, okay, my people, people always ask you when it's your birthday, like, oh, how do you feel? Like, do you feel different?
Typical question,
And I'm like,
yes.
yeah, and I'm like, I don't feel different as much as I feel like now that I get older, people are going to assume that I'm going to be more responsible, more mature, and I'm like,
So people have expectations over you now.
well, I mean,
yes.
this is just all going on in my head. Like, this is what I'm assuming that people are going to perceive when, because, I guess I think about myself when I think of, like, a 21-year-old. And I'm like, okay, I'm assuming, like, they maybe don't have everything together. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to think like a 21-year-old. So, no, I think that's why, to me, the idea of talking today, the topic we want to talk about is, like, maturity is such an interesting topic because it really actually doesn't matter how old you are.
True.
You know what I mean? And I think that's where, for me, I'm like, man, I started to realize as I was getting older that I had to, like, unlearn some of the things that I thought. Like I used to really think that when you got to a certain age, your life just all came together and people just, like, gave you houses. Like, you don't have to, like, work for that stuff. Like, it just happens, you just wake up one day and you have a kids and family and it just all comes together. But no, I don't think that's actually true.
I haven't experienced that yet. You're right. Because I think maturity is something that I feel that's not necessarily something that we pursue vocally. We don't say, you don't ask someone hey, what do you want to be when you're 28? I want to be mature. No, I mean, we're pursuing, hey, I want to have a house. I want to have a car. I want to have a business. I want to have this. I want to have my career. I want to have whatever else, assuming that those things are going to bring maturity into our life, like you just said.
Yeah.
And I think that that's such an important conversation because I feel like, the phrase of, like, 30s are the new 20s. You know what I mean? Like, we keep pushing that. And it's so interesting. I don't want to be that person, but, but I'm going to be that person.
Go for it.
The reality is that you have 30-something-year-old people acting like a 21-year-old person, right? And you haven't evolved, you haven't grown, you haven't, nurtured certain aspects of your life, adjust certain aspects of your life.
Yeah.
And I think, obviously, maturity has to be intentional. Mm-hmm. It's not by accident that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, for me, I'm very much so like a, introspective thinker. So I'm always, even from a young age, I was already trying to think of, like, how can I better myself? How can I, when I graduated college at 21, like, I'm already trying to think about the future and think about, trying to achieve certain goals. But I think even at that age, I think when I was processing this, I'm a very optimistic person. So, my family, I always, like, kind of jokingly say, like, my family has this mentality or perspective, like, oh, like, nothing's a big deal. Like, you'll figure it out. Like, it'll all come together. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, oh, you mean life doesn't just come together, like, without work?
Yeah.
And I think for me, I'm like, okay, like, it's not that I didn't have a work ethic, but I started to realize that there's a lot of things that we have to kind of, like, realize that, man, I have to be really specific and focused on the things that I want to accomplish in my life. And in order for me to actually see these things come to fruition means that I have to unlearn some of the, like, immature aspects or things. Like, so another perfect example of way that I used to think was, like, I always wanted to, like, get into this top physical shape, but I never wanted to, like, change my diet.
Yeah.
So, I always was, like, frustrated, like, man, like, can I just eat eat like burgers and like Jack in the Box at night and work out and you know, like your workout is never gonna outbeat like a bad diet, right? Yes. So I was like, oh man, those are like my frustrating moments of realizing some things that I had to like unlearn in my life.
Yeah, I think, man, and the reality is that let's take a little bit back, right?
Yeah.
Many of our unhealthy behaviors, unhealthy patterns that we have, many of them, we inherit them from our family, you know?
Yeah.
We're not blaming necessarily our family, but the reality is that we are a result of our parents, you know, of our family, of our family environment. So the reality is that many of the things, many times we assume they're okay because we learn it from our family.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
We never question them. Is this correct? Is this right? So we just assume, and we come into relationships, into projects, you know, into our school, into pursuing our, you know, our future, assuming that this is okay because they did it that way. And, you know, like, let's be honest, marriage, when we come into marriage, those things come to surface, and it's like, wait, but this is the right way to do it. No, that's the way you used to do it with your family because your mom used to do it that way, because your dad used to do it that way. So the reality is that we're not just fighting with the things that we learn. We fight with the things that we learn from decades, maybe a legacy, you know, generations of this. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's what's, you know, as I've gotten to this new age of 28, you know, with all my wealth of knowledge and maturity, those are things that I've started to realize, you know, taking full ownership and responsibility for where I'm at and where I want to go, and no longer I think this is something that I always hear about when people talk about getting into a relationship at an older age, when you're kind of stuck in your ways, if you heard that phrase. You know, and for me personally, I think that's why it's really important, and this probably comes with maturity for people, is always being willing to see like kind of your flaws and the things that you need to work on. I think that is probably a really good place for us to be, is acknowledging that there's some work that needs to be done.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, because I think you hit something very important, right? Because as I'm guessing when we get older, I never date, you know, as a young adult.
Yeah.
And we will have a podcast about this in the future. But anyways, I'm sure that you have to acknowledge, you have to be introspective and evaluate, you know, and analyze. Am I becoming the right person, right? I know that I'm looking for the right person, but am I becoming the right person? Because not everything that we do necessarily, I don't want to say it's appealing, but it doesn't necessarily is going to work for the future relationship that we long and that we want.
Yeah.
And I think moving into like, because I want to talk about also, so what do we do, right? Yeah. Because we're talking about getting rid of like or learning.
Yeah.
How do we replace that, right? But before we jump into that, I think one of the things that we also have to get rid of is to unlearn expectations, right? Because we live in a society. We have expectations that we learn from society, from culture, from our family, right? Your parents have, maybe they teach you should achieve this by certain age. You should get this by, you know, whatever it is. Culture, you should have a house by this time. You should travel to so many places at, you know, a certain age. And I think it's not fair. Yeah. It's not fair that we have those expectations, and we have to be okay to unlearn those expectations and to, you know, evaluate our own lives. Yeah. What that means for us at this place that we're at right now. Because I can't compare with you or with someone else, right? About my own, the expectations that I should have over my life.
Yeah, and I think, you know, having to unlearn those expectations, I think, is really crucial, especially when you're talking about like a relational dynamic. And first of all, to even be able to communicate that.
Right.
Because I think a lot of times we're acting and we're responding to situations without even understanding where that's coming from. And a lot of times, especially as you get older, you get frustrated even with yourself. You're like, well, why aren't, you know, I seeing the results that I want? And it's really because you have these expectations that may or may not be realistic. or maybe that they are realistic. It's just you're not doing the things that you need to be doing in order to achieve those goals. And
that's facts.
Yeah. So expectations are definitely, and I think for me, I think about the expectations we put on ourselves are kind of a big driving force when it comes to that. And I think that's where we have to learn to unlearn, some of those things as far as being able to let those things go, but be really in tune with where we're at today and understanding the world around us. I think we can get into our minds so much so that we're not willing to, see the real picture and take the right steps.
That's so good. That's so good. And let me take it to another aspect of it.
Yeah.
Because obviously, we're not afraid to talk about our faith. One of the experiences that I had, I think one of the things that we also have to learn is doctrine.
Yeah.
I think in our faith, for the many people that have grew up in a religious environment, whatever that looks like, right? I think what ended up happening is that you grew up with your family being religious or being in faith or whatever that is, right? That you never question those things. Some people abandon those things. Some people continue with their faith.
Yeah.
Many people that I found out, that I have conversations, they never learn how to challenge, critique, and evaluate their own faith, right?
Yeah.
And they live in a 2020, right, with the mindset of 1990, and it's not that it's wrong. It's just you have to be willing to unlearn certain things that they're not fruitful for this period of your life. Because, one of the things that I remember doing, I remember when I actually decided to follow Jesus, I remember that I grew up in a Catholic church, in a Catholic environment, really didn't go, I didn't really care. But one of the things the reason why I say yes to Jesus and I jump into this, it was because I was like, if I'm going to devote myself to this, and if I'm going to say yes to this, I want to know why. I don't want to live and whatever my mom tells me, whatever my grandma tells me, obviously they help a lot, but I was like, I want to find my own faith, and I want to challenge everything that I believe or why I believe in, my traditions, my practices, all those things. Even in church, I keep asking the questions, why do we do that? And why do we believe that? But many times we have to learn how to unlearn, many of those things.
Yeah, and that's the idea of what you're talking about is even just this idea of like traditionalism. Like you do things because it's tradition, not because it's necessarily right or wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's a really good point when you think about faith, especially, getting to not just maturity in life, but maturity in our faith and maturity in our relationship with God. And I think that's something that is really something that I'm for sure, like I could say as well, has been like a journey for myself and thinking about, okay, what does my personal relationship with God look like? And in order for me to grow in my relationship, it means that I have to unlearn some of the things that I used to, believe or think about God. So for example, it's even as simple as, some people think that the only way to connect with God is going to a physical church building.
Right.
And realizing, okay, well, that I have learned to embrace that I can experience God, even in this room right now as we talk. And that's something that's like, may be different for some people.
Completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to say that you and Vanessa are a great example of that. Both of you grew up in a faith environment, Christian home, right? But I do believe that you guys have owned your own faith, and I think I applaud that because it's not easy to say, hey, I'm gonna actually dig in and jump into my own journey. Even if that maybe takes me in a different path that probably my family's not going, but I'm okay with that. So I applaud that for
I appreciate that, and I think it's actually as we're kind of like dissecting this a lot, I really feel like maturity is really to me where a lot of people really kind of fall off in relationships because I'm thinking like, I think about like a lot of my friends who I grew up in church with, and I think that because they weren't willing to mature in their faith with God and acknowledging that their relationship with God was going to look different from when they were a 10-year-old versus when they're 20s and growing up as an adult, that I think a lot of people, when they're not willing to mature and not willing to see their relationship with God evolve, is when their decision is either I'm going to continue or I'm going to stop. And I think we experience that even in relationships in general with friends and significant others. When you're dating, it's like you get yourself to a point where one person is willing to mature, start making some big boy and big girl decisions in life, and the problem is that one says I want to mature, and then the other person says I'm not willing to.
Dude, that's so good, because now that you're talking about that, one of the things that I value about my wife, Gabby, is that even though it's uncomfortable for her to push herself to grow, she has devoted herself that this is a piece that is needed in our relationship and in our marriage. Like, to me, I'm more like, yes, let's do this. Let's grow. Let's move on. You know me. My wife is more static, more like, let's just stay here, let's just enjoy. Let's just be comfortable. But I seen pushing herself, into spaces, into even, introspective conversations, counseling, willing to put herself out there and be challenged. Dude, that's so good, because many people, like you said, one wants to grow, the other one it doesn't, and that's where it just becomes, the tension comes in, and it's hard.
Yeah, and that's the one part of our life where I think, it requires a lot of someone to be able to see that and acknowledge within themselves, like, those things that they have to do. It takes a lot. Yeah. And you're right. And you kind of alluded to in the beginning, like, a lot of that is we're taught that, from a young age, or we weren't taught that, from our families and things like that. I know that some people, we have to learn and grow in our self-awareness of where we're at,
That's deep.
And yeah, so it can easily be something that can be a struggle for a lot of people,
Yeah,
definitely.
And I think I don't know if maybe you can speak into this. Maybe you have a different opinion. I don't know if as you get older, it becomes harder to unlearn things. Maybe because certain things work into a certain seasons, and then we think that that's going to transcend into every season, right? Yeah. And I think that many times, I don't know if as you get older, you start getting more into the rhythm of maybe who you are and certain things work in your life. And so, okay, those practices, those disciplines, those things work. So I'm gonna keep pulling those. Yeah. And not knowing that every season you might have to change habits, disciplines, the way you perceive things, willing to let go and to get rid of things that we value, but they don't work no more.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing.
Yeah. I personally don't think that it's harder to change when you get older. What I think is actually happening is that when we're young, we are like more like, okay, we're just learning, and we usually are more trusting of like what people are teaching us, But I think what happens is that we get to a certain point where we find comfort in the way that we're living our life.
Completely.
And I think that what happens is, so to me, like when I find people that are like particularly stubborn in their thinking and the way that they people might call out some things and then they're not willing to really see that. And some people are just not ready at that time, which is, we can't change that. But I think is that because what happens is that now they have all the responsibility within themselves to change, to choose to change or not, to choose to grow or not. And I think that people get into a place where they're comfortable maybe with the way that their life looks like, or they're comfortable with the way that they think and the way that they, just kind of go about their days. And people would rather choose comfort and choose, living in that aspect versus the walking into, growth and maturity, because the reality is that's uncomfortable and it's not something that's particularly easy. Yeah. It's a tough, way to live.
Man, I think I agree with you completely. And you know what? Yesterday I was listening to this. I think many times the reason why we don't actually mature many times is because we're fighting the wrong battles. And when we fighting the wrong battles, what I mean by that is that many times when we have people that come and challenge us, maybe our boss, maybe our parents, maybe our friends, maybe a mentor, anyone, when they challenge us in our comfort, we fight against it. We have this battle against them, and that's the wrong battle. We fight in the wrong battles, many, many times. And then we keep fighting the wrong battles. We're never gonna be able to mature because we haven't grown. We haven't grown, and to identify, is that something that I want to fight against, or is something that I need to actually take ownership and grow?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times, like in a scenario that you're bringing up, I think like within us, like, we have this like desire with relationships, like we could have a great conversation, but the second that like someone brings up something that could be personal, or could be like, having that card, like if you were to say, hey, like, I love you, but like, here's some things, and it could be approach, right? It could be like how you approach the conversation. Yeah. But obviously if it's a mentor situation, you would hope that someone is more open and willing to learn and change and grow.
Because you have choose to listen to someone.
Exactly. And I think that's a big part of it. Like you just said right now, is that you're choosing to give that person permission to speak into your life. I think a lot of times what happens is people have not given us permission to speak into their life, but yet we're still trying to. Yes. And then when we do that, what ends up happening is the defensive walls go up. Yeah. And then when people are defensive, I mean, there's just no way to get through to that. But I think depending on like a healthy conversation, people might initially get defensive, but hopefully kind of like reflect on what's said,
And let me piggyback on that. Going to this aspect of like, okay, so I have to learn things. I have to unlearn things. What is one of the things that I need to do to start become more self-aware, to start taking steps? And so that I think one of those things that I think you need voices in your life. You need voices of wisdom in your life, because I mean, I think we both have mentors, different aspects of our lives. We have allowed them to be a voice of influence, to be a voice of wisdom, to be a voice that can call us out, Yeah. And I think the moment we don't do that, I feel like we limit the opportunities for us to grow, because there's things that we're never going to be aware, right? Yeah. There's things that we're not aware.
Yeah. Well, I think what happens is we live in a space where I perceive myself to be a certain way. So when I think about myself when I wake up, I think of myself as a certain type of way. But you being a friend might view me a different way. That could be positive or negative. It could be better, it could be worse. And I think is that those perspectives is that everyone has a different perspective of each other. And it could be based on how much we even allow people to know about our lives. And so that's where I completely agree. Like, giving people the ability to kind of speak and share the things that they see that sometimes are blind spots to us, the way that we might think or react. And I know, I mean, for me personally, I've probably learned a lot of that in marriage when, my wife can see something that I definitely don't see. But having those healthy conversations with people that you trust, I think are absolutely critical to unlearning some of the ways that you do things. And I think that's where, sometimes in relationships, when you have good friends and good people around you, like sometimes people struggle with that when they see someone growing and they're like, oh, you changed. Yep. Oh, you're not the same. Yep. And it's like, I'm not the same because I learned, because I unlearned, because I was willing to mature and to see that to acknowledge and accept the fact that life isn't only the way that I see it to be, that I'm willing to allow people to speak into it.
That's so good. I mean, the willingness to explore out of what I think that's a hard one, know? What are other things you feel like, what can we do to unlearn? How do we even, work through that? Yeah. What works for you?
What works for me, I think I'm still trying to get better at that. I think that's kind of like a part of my process right now. Like I said, as I've kind of got into this age where, one thing that I think I've done is attempted to just be as honest with myself as I can. And when I think about the goals that I want to achieve in my life, I always am now getting to a place of writing things down and seeing where I'm at today and how do I get there. And that's something that has helped me, because I think for me, like I said, I can be a little overly optimistic where I want to give myself a little more credit than I really deserve. And I think that's where I'm being honest with myself and saying, hey, like I need to be okay with the fact that I haven't done, certain things that I need to do. Or last year I said I was going to do this and I didn't do it. And it's really keeping myself accountable. Like I think we always want to say like, oh, you need to have an accountability partner. You need to have people to help you. But at the same time, like you have to keep yourself accountable.
Yeah.
And because that's where a lot of people end up falling is, oh, I've done this, I've done the work, I've reached out, I've asked for help, but I'm not seeing change. And I think a lot of times I realized as I got older was like, oh, okay, well I'm the only one who's responsible for myself.
Right.
Like, as much as people might love to try to help me and I have people that I can go to, if I'm not willing to keep myself accountable to grow and to change and to put in the work, then I don't think I'm going to see the results that I want to see.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think that everything complements your growth. You're the one responsible. You have to take ownership over that. I think one of the things that works for me, and it's something that I don't have control over, but it has helped me evaluate my life, and that's failure. Failure has shown me and pushed me to say, okay, what did I did maybe wrong? What did it work? What didn't work? And I think failure has pushed me to really kind of unlearn and to focus in certain aspects of my life that I was like, okay, maybe that's a strength. Maybe that's weak in that aspect of my life. Maybe I have to get rid of that because it forced me. The problem is that many of us, if we fail and we keep going the same way, that's where it gets very tough because we need to acknowledge, okay, if I fail, maybe for whatever reason, maybe I have to really pause and evaluate my life and see, okay, I need to unlearn this. I have to get rid of it's the reality of it. So I don't have control over that. It just so happens, many times. But I think it has shown me many, many times,
No, but that's really good because I think that when you think about failure, because honestly, you could break it down to if you have simple goals for yourself every single day, you might fail 3-4 times a week.
Right.
If you're like, my goal is to
keep eating.
Yeah, exactly. Like if my goal is to eat healthy and I keep snacking, I've had that goal where I'm like, oh, I need to stop. Like, man, like I have these little chocolates and I'm like, I just, got used to eating them 5 times a week. Man, I need twice a week, maybe max. And then every time I go into it, I'm like, dang, I failed again, but it's like little things like that. I think when we can get comfortable with acknowledging like the little failures in our life and seeing them and being willing to work on them, then I think that better prepares us for the big ones when we really had our heart and our soul into certain things and it doesn't happen. And that I think is a part of the maturity process, right? Of starting to see ourselves and our lives, not just from the big picture, but to see the daily decisions that we make and getting to a point of improving, getting closer to what we want to achieve.
Completely. No, man. I think that's some good stuff. And I think when it comes into unlearning, I feel like we can replace certain things, We have to know ourselves, like you say, we have to, like, self-awareness is big in this aspect, and this the way we see ourselves and analyze ourselves. And so there's certain things that we have to replace, like exercising, or even emotional, or in the creative area, we have to be willing to find new ways to do it. It doesn't mean that you have to get rid of completely. Maybe some of you do. Maybe some of you just change it, into something like, okay, this works. Maybe that. For example, I think for me, we were just having a conversation with my wife. First, one of the things that replenishes our energy, and our lives, was to go to coffee shops, right? So obviously with this pandemic, everything got shut down, right? We would go to the coffee shops because we love not just the coffee, but the places kind of like trigger us and creative ways, the way the aesthetics and the way they decorate and everything, the environment just triggers something in us. So when everything got shut down, a big piece that we were actually digging in so that we can get replenished in the creative area, and even to bring clarity, to change the environment, I got shut down. So I had to figure it out, a new way to get triggered and my creative aspect of, and also to replenish my energy, So there's certain seasons that this happens, right? That things need to change. And I can't just get attached to what I know.
Yeah.
And I don't want to let it go. You have to let it go and say, okay, Nat, I need to move on and I need to figure this out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the world that we live in today is constantly evolving. Constantly things are changing. I mean, I don't think any single one of us came into this year expecting to experience what we did and experience, closures and not being able to live our life in the way that we were used to.
Yeah.
But I think that we have to, even if it's okay to go through seasons where you're upset, or you're frustrated, or because I'm sure like when you guys went through that, with the not being able to do that, I mean, it's not easy, right? You have these moments and I definitely agree with allowing ourselves to feel these frustrations. But I think that once we kind of come back to a place of acceptance and they say, okay, this is now where we're at today, can't, do the things we used to do. Find now going into the step of finding how can I evolve? How can I adjust? We can't go to coffee shops, but we can make ourselves a cup of coffee at home and go for a walk.
Yeah. Yep.
Hiking,
different ways.
Anything like that. And I think that, to me sounds like a very mature response of way to handling things,
Completely.
But it's a process. It's something that, we have to allow ourselves to go through that process. And I think as human beings, it can be frustrating. We think that, why don't people just get over it? Why, and I think the hard part is like, depending on how we look at the world, like we can, we can overshare too much on social media. People tend to have that problem where they want to blast out their frustrations. And I think it's important to not always go to those outlets. And I think that's where I would encourage people to like pray, meditate, like have connections where you can let out your frustration in a way that isn't going to be hurtful, but allow you to get to the step of, okay, like I need to evolve. I need to find a new way to do this.
Yeah. Like you say, I think, if the mature thing to do is, if social media is your only outlet, I think I will question it.
Yeah.
You have to find those relationships, those people where you can actually, it's a safe space where you can actually share how you feel. But yeah, man, that's good stuff.
Yeah, I think, I'm excited to start this new season, this journey. I'm currently day 2 of being 28 years old. So,
do you make changes already?
I haven't made changes, but I'm accepting where I'm at today and ready for the future and for what this next year holds.
That's good, man.
So,
well, we celebrate you.
Thank you, man. Thank you. This is birthday episode for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, thank you for listening, for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Let's go. We out.
Hey, well, it was all a dream. I try to tell them things in life ain't what they really seem. If you ain't dreaming large enough, you don't need God to lead. What more can I say? I'm taking what was meant for me.